I think one of the barriers that appear, and when I say barriers, I don't mean that there's like an actual barrier anywhere, because there really isn't, but we talk about conventional barriers. We talk about what seem to be the obstructions that get people jammed up, stuck in their head, seemingly out of contact with that which you can never actually be out of contact with. You know, everybody relates to this. I'm sure you hear that there's nowhere to go and it's just this and all, but that's not what it feels like. It feels contracted and stuck and trapped and averse and disassociated and all that at times, or some version of that. So what's the discrepancy there? And that's what I would call a barrier. So again, there's no actual barrier, but there are functional barriers perhaps. There are ways of speaking about this that can really help find the view that's creating the barrier, or find the view, that's essentially creating the barrier, or the barrier effect. And then by seeing the view closely, often it dissolves. And then there's no barrier, right? And we do that again and again and again in various ways with this process. There are predictable barriers. But they're not always, they don't always manifest in the same way for every individual or every practitioner. Also, they don't necessarily appear in a linear fashion. There are some patterns to things, of course, but talking too much about patterns, stages, and so forth can really solidify that into the seeking mind, which ends up being not helpful. So there has to be a naturalness, an organicness, a fluidity, a spontaneity in this kind of exchange, in this discussion we are engaged in here. And so how does that's just that simplicity, that organic nature of just this, that naturalness that is here, ever-changing, and yet still, how does that correlate with addressing a barrier, an apparent barrier? That's the question, right? That's the trick with all of this. One barrier, in the way I'm speaking about barriers, that I think presents itself at various stages of this process is putting the cart before the horse. And usually that happens when we hear something that we have glimpsed or tasted, but in a sense is sort of beyond our direct experience of realization at that point. So what happens is we kind of make it either a goal or a standard of comparison to our own experience. An example might be non-dual, right? You might hear about non-duality and have sensed it. You may have had a moment where space seems to collapse. And as we've discussed, it can be anywhere between the most blissful, amazing thing you've ever experienced and terror. Like it literally has like an infinite spectrum of experience, actually, those moments. But you may have glimpsed that. And then in the later on, it's like, okay, how do I get back to that? Or comparing everything that's happening to that previous experience as if you're going to recreate it, which is never going to happen. So that's putting the cart before the horse, right? And it's always something to do with thought. It's always something to do with mind, imagination, memory, trying to extrapolate a memory of an experience into some kind of technique or process to get it back right here. But as spirituality or your insight matures, you see more and more, it's impossible. It's impossible to get anything back because you never had anything. And so the feeling of grasping for experiences will slow down, soften, and maybe stop. Another way, putting the cart before the horse happens, I see in a certain sort of subset of people. It's not a demographic of people, it's a subset of the way some people process. And that is hearing about something like anatta, or no self, but having not much realization yet, not really having even sometimes a first insight, a first awakening. And you can really get yourself confused with that. In fact, I would say the insight of no self, the idea of no self, the doctrine of no self, the insight and or doctrine of non-dual even, don't worry about them as doctrines. Don't worry about them as understandings, because you're just never going to understand them. They're not understandable at all. They are an insight that will dawn if you continue to dissolve the fixations, the barriers, the views. They will just naturally dawn, because they're not stages and they're not experiences. They're just statements about the nature of reality when it's unfiltered by conditioned mind. That's all they are. Those concepts. So yeah, you can really put the cart before the horse by believing, well, there's no self, so there's no such thing as an I am experience. In the same way you can believe in a higher self or a different spiritualized version of a self. If that's what's happening, and there's been no significant shift in identity, I would generally recommend somebody investigate the nature of self, the nature of what you take yourself to be. Don't just conceptually deny it. That's useless. You can make concepts about anything. It's not helpful in this space. What's helpful in this space is authenticity. So again, it often just comes back to letting go of concepts, letting go of concepts of time, concepts of who you are, concepts of who you're not, concepts of what you're afraid of. And then as we get closer, letting go of concepts about what's actually happening right now. Like, no, right now I know what's happening, because every time I go to retreat, this happens, and then I feel peaceful, and then now my mind's erasing, and then I know that's happening, right? These concepts that are just kind of like the background reflection back here. It's like a tape recorder. It's like you're reading the tape recorder of what's happening, instead of just turning around and seeing, like, there's no tape recorder. There's no way to record this. There's nothing that can record anything. There's nothing apart from anything. There's no need to stand apart from experience or reality, and there's no ability to do so. That's what I'm ultimately trying to get us to turn toward. And then it's simple, very simple. There's just the sound of cars, birds, but without the labels, without the pointing to, just that experience, pure. It doesn't need meaning. It's too real to need meaning. It doesn't need purpose. It's too real, obvious, full on to talk about some kind of purpose of it. You'd have to back away from it and go into a framework of reality that's just cognitive, and then say, how does this quote unquote purpose fit into all the other purposes, or what does it mean to me or not mean to me? If you're thinking about what the bird call means to you, what it sounds like, how distant it is, then you're not really hearing it. You're hearing your mind, paying attention to thought. To really hear it, you have to be it in a pretty literal way. See that you were never not that sound. That's more really you than any thought you could have about yourself. The sound of the birds right now is more real than anything you could ever think about yourself, ever. No matter how closely held and habituated a thought is about you, how fucked up you are, how enlightened you are, how confused you are, that you know what happens at retreat, that you know what happens in regular life, that you know what spirituality is. All of that stuff pales in comparison to the intimacy of the sound of a bird, this bird. And the sensations in the body, same thing. The trick with the sensations in the body is the body map is very, very quickly added on to the experience. And it's a mental process, actually. Body map. Sense of proprioception, space, and location in the body. So we deconstructed a couple of words over the last couple of days, which was fun, that had to do with time. So we're going to deconstruct, or at least investigate, a word that has to do with space. And it has to do with body sense, so location. What does location mean? When I have been in Q&A the last couple of days, I had people do this simple exercise. Touch the chair. Touch your knee. Touch your head. Oh, everyone's doing it. This is great. Good. Now touch location. Where are you going to reach to touch location? Where could you reach to? Right? There's nowhere to find that. So the sound. How are you going to find location in a sound? You don't. There's just sound. Just like Buddha told Bahya when Bahya tracked him down and met him, and Buddha said, in the scene, there's only the scene. In the herd, there's only the herd. Oh.
I think your microphone is sinking.
Oh, thank you. Beautiful. Yeah, as Buddha said to Bahya, a lot of the suttas start with this little story. It's like, so-and-so heard Buddha was over here in this town. The blessed one was over in this town over here. So he went to find him. And that's how a lot of the stories start. And anyway, Bahya went up to Buddha, and if I remember right, he kind of bugged him a couple times. And then finally Buddha said, in the scene, only the scene. In the herd, only the herd. He's like, practice this way and it will be, essentially said the sense of self will disappear at some point. I'm really summarizing, but the reason I laughed is every time I think about this, it's like, and then the sutta ends with, oh yeah, and then after that, Bahya got ran over and killed by a cow. Like, they just like throw that in there. It's just so funny. It's so abrupt, So, beware. There are cows around here. Yeah, there's a donkey over there. Right, Chad? A happy donkey. Yeah. So, yeah, the simple statements are so profound and powerful when you finally get what it means. It's always been there. The sensation of your hands right now. It's always been there, that sensation, regardless of the sense of having a body or not. It has no beginning or end. It has no substance. It has no specific location. It's as big as the sky. It's as big as the cosmos. It's just that sensation. Just the vacuum or the leaf blower. Sound. Where do you feel that leaf blower? Look in your body, find it. It's there. Where do you find it? Where do you find the birds? If the mind is saying out there, outside, that's okay. Those are thoughts. Where do you find the bird sound? It leaves no trace, the sound. And because it's not located anywhere specific, It inhabits everything. It inhabits every location, every possible location, such that location makes no sense anymore. So when we drop the illusion of space, it doesn't mean there's nothingness. It doesn't mean everything disappears. It's just that appearance is finally seen, felt, heard, tasted, and smelled to be what it is, which is radically intimate. It's your lover that will never leave you. To steal a line from Tony Parsons. I'd basically either bag on him or steal lines from him. I have a love-hate relationship with him. It's a joke. I've never actually met him, but he's a good guy. It's just that sound. And probably most people here can actually sense it for a moment when I say, where do you find the sound in the body? Where do you feel it? And for a moment, I'm sure you do, but probably pretty quickly the mind goes, oh, I don't know how to do this. Or, oh, that can't be it. Oh, I know that sound's not in my body. The thoughts are enticing, but only because we're addicted to thoughts, not because they have to do with reality. Because nothing that thought says about that sound has anything to do with the sound. It has to do with thought and the nature of thought. So deep meditation, samadhi, sustained meditation over a week with a retreat and joriki that builds with that and all that, that's all great. And it can show you a lot, and it can help you release a lot, and it can calm the mind, and it can calm the body. And at times it can become unconditioned consciousness such that there's no sense of you anymore apart from that ocean of consciousness, the ocean of being. And that's great. But don't overlook the moments that's not the experience, when there's not samadhi, like sitting right here, right now, wide awake. Because that's also a sort of fixation of the mind that, oh, well, if I'm not in deep samadhi, if I'm not in retreat, then there's not an insight available. That's not true. I'd say most of the, just offhand, the people I can think of that described like the moment where a non-dual shift just happened wasn't in samadhi, wasn't in deep meditation. It's like this. It's like the bird all of a sudden is not what you thought it was. Bird sound, or the toilet flushing was not what you thought it was. It's like the most enjoyable thing you've ever experienced. And then it's the next is sound, and the next is sensation, and then another sound and sensation. And now you're in a much better position to explore or surrender to or investigate the deeper insight that is the fundamental insight about identity itself. Because the dividing mind really doesn't have much more to do after non-dual clarity is ongoing. If the mind isn't constantly busy dividing everything up in what appears to be a physical reality into body and other and self and other and object and subject and so forth, when it's not busy doing that, then it's just seen more clearly that concepts of division, me and other people, how I am, how you are, how we interact, how my past and my future affect what I am now. Because the basic container of thought that seems like it's dividing reality up is not there anymore, those thoughts are much harder to hold on to. They're much harder to believe. And so the identity, the seed of identity, the seed of self-consciousness, the loop of self-consciousness has nowhere to be anymore. And yet the mind will still try to process it for a while, and it feels really strange sometimes. Like, damn well there's no actual identity, no self in there somewhere, no apparatus that actually makes this separate from that, and that, the way our minds are sort of putting things together. That it's just not true. And yet you'll feel the tendency to try to identify, keep going for a while, or it'll come and go, but you're not fooled by it anymore. And so over time, it just kind of subsides. And then sometimes it just stops abruptly and it's noticed. And as I've said to people, I think a couple times here, maybe up in Q&A, if you're working or like approaching the non-dual space, it's clarifying for you. You've figured out how to kind of do that kind of inquiry that's not so intellectual. It's not intellectual at all. It's not pushing or trying to impose a memorized experience onto, but rather actually directly investigating the nature of immediate experience. And you're able to do that. That's great. Just always be alert for anything that feels contracted, heady, because if any of that stuff's happening, it's usually not anything to do with the way you're doing or approaching the non-dual contemplations. It's something that just is something coming up from shadow again. And it can feel unrelated, like you want to ignore that and keep working on the non-dual somehow. But if you really saw how it was, you wouldn't want to, because the more filters you dissolve, the less you can actually distance yourself from anything, including an emotion. So you may be better off actually just addressing that beforehand. I have seen, this is true. This took me quite a while to discern, just because I meet so many different types of people who wake up different ways. But I think people who have done a lot of really, really deep, authentic, sincere shadow work for years and years and years before they wake up, they have a much easier time after they wake up, for sure, especially in deeper stages. All the way up until no self. No self can be tricky. Insight-wise, it can be tricky, and it can be, what happens after it is unpredictable. And I'm not sure you can prepare for that. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just not anything you can ever prepare for or imagine. How could the self prepare for its own end? It just doesn't make sense, right? So yeah, at that stage of things, traumas that you didn't even know were traumas, or traumas that you felt like you had dealt with for years and really gotten to the bottom of, these little residues that are left will come fully into consciousness, and it can be daunting, but it's also rather sporadic. You might just feel this thing blow up into consciousness, and you become that repressed emotion for a while, and it can be rather unsettling. Then it's just gone, just obliterated like everything else, and then feel some peace for a while, and it can come, something like that kind of reoccur. But it's because now, even beyond the non-dual, when there's the sense of self is not there, there's just no way to even begin to really build a coping mechanism anymore. So everything has to be felt directly. And it's actually okay. It's really good, because this is what you came for. But again, as you're working with non-dual, if you are, as you're working in the sense fields or with the subject-object construct, or investigating the nature of in the scene, only the scene, just be open to just turning around and doing shadow work when you need to. Going back and feeling an emotion that wasn't fully felt or integrated or accepted or held, however you want to say that, because it will pop up here and there for sure. It's amazing how challenging it is to find a microphone stand that doesn't drift. It's like they have one job in life. You'd think they were designed well. I'm sure they're out there. So, to loop back to what I was talking about at the beginning, putting the cart before the horse, I saw it in a recent video that I released, a comment on it. Oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't release the video, but it was an older video and a new comment. And I did a video on self-inquiry. And the comment was something like, this is the opposite of what's real or true, or they were kind of saying like, this isn't helpful or something. And I just asked them what their experience was. I was curious what they mean by that. And they said, well, what I learned is it's like, turn towards the mystery, turn away from the self, because there's no self or something. And that's putting the cart way before the horse. If you don't understand what I mean, if you don't have the deep, clear intuition of what I mean when I say the experience of pure being, it doesn't have to be the I am sense, but for a lot of people, it rather feels or felt like the I am sense. If you can't even relate to that and you don't understand what I'm saying when you don't know that insight, then you're trying to jump over it. That's not helpful. Rather, investigate what you feel like you are right now, where you feel like you are right now. If it's gone, it's gone. But that would be so obvious that you're not going to want to argue with what I'm saying, because you will have had this direct insight before of pure being. Like it's as if there's no, you can't go closer to the center anymore because you're there. And then once you're there, there's no such thing as a center, so it becomes rather oceanic. And once that insight has dawned, we could call it kensho or awakening. Once that insight has dawned, you really do always have access to it, but it's not stable. You'll know that. It'll come and go, and it's a sort of, requires concentrated effort. No, that's not the right way to say it. It requires acknowledgement, and it's very subject to what environment you're in and how triggered you are and how much emotion there is and how many people are around. But you in solitude, in a retreat, you can find your way back to it very, very easily just by acknowledging and remembering, oh yeah, of course. Just this oceanic experience of undifferentiated being. And what I call that consciousness, because I just like to be technically accurate with the way I try to be consistent with the way I speak about things, but unbound consciousness. I think someone messaged me just a day ago or so, and they're like, I finally realized that the thoughts are not separate from my experience of I. It's all the same stuff, and again, I'm sure this person has heard me say stuff like that many, many times. But when it hits, that's an insight. That's a shift in identity. So don't bypass that because you've heard Buddhist, doctrine about no self and anatta and all that. Because it will confuse you later, I think. In my experience, I find that it confuses people later on. Because you can push hard with samadhi and with sort of inquiry and get tastes of non-duality, get tastes of kind of empty nature and things like that. But if you conclude from that and from what you hear that the sense of pure being is an illusion, or there's the I am sense isn't there or something, then you'll get kind of stuck. I've seen this. So don't undervalue the availability, the simple, always there availability of consciousness. And if you don't know how to go there, what the catalyst is to lead you there, just continue to ask, where am I? Where's the sense of I? Where am I contemplating all of this from if I'm contemplating? Where do the thoughts seem to be viewed from? And if you're imagining a viewpoint out here and thoughts over here like a three-dimensional construct, where are you imagining that from? It's that simple. This is kind of the funniest part of the whole awakening process. It's so not funny until you laugh, then you finally get it, and then it's really funny. It's in Zen, there's a very famous analogy story called Inyadata's head, or Inyadata's lost her head or something. And it's absurd, but it actually is rather like what I'm talking about, and it's pretty apt. So there's this young woman named Inyadata, and for some reason, at some point, and the story has different versions, but she suddenly becomes really freaked out because she thinks she doesn't have a head. So she runs around looking for her head. She's like asking everybody where my head is. Where's my head, And the people are like thinking she's crazy, and they end up like tying her up because she's just nuts. Like she's running around looking for her head, like freaking out, anxious, can't find it. Tie her up, and then at some point someone hits her over the head and she feels it, and it just hits like that, and she just, of course now she knows she has a head. And it's just obvious. It hits you that obviously. Like, oh my God, of course. It's that thing, like, of course I have a self-sense. Of course I feel like where I am. How can you not feel like where you are? How can you not perceive where you're perceiving from? How can you not be aware where the awareness seems to emanate? It's just here-ness. And that insight does lead into the deeper spiritual unfolding, and at the same time, it's always a valuable practice to lead yourself back to that sense of pure being, pure undifferentiated consciousness. Because it will continue to calm the mind, unload the polarities, and it will continue to show you, give you that flavor of the undifferentiated. It's not as clear as the undifferentiated experience of the bird call. That's a different kind of clarity. But it has, the experience of it, the experience of this pure being is similarly absent of the experience of subject and object. It's similarly clear and free from the hypnosis with thought after thought after thought. The pushing and pulling in thought. And again, the only thing that can push or pull is the sense of an I as a thought. So when the I thought and the pushing and pulling on other thoughts, when all that collapses into just one experience, some people call it I am. Not a thought I am, but the experience of I am, or the realization of I am. And then some people just feel it as this like sort of infinite being. But it's undifferentiated, non-polarized, non-struggling, meaning non-pushing and pulling. It's that nature of it you become more and more familiar with. It's rather peaceful, rather blissful, but usually mostly available during meditation, or most clearly available during meditation. And as you acclimatize to that, which can take some time, then you'll have a natural inclination. Well, first of all, what that'll do is it'll bring a lot of shadow material into consciousness, and that's going to happen. But as that is worked through, what's going to happen is that trusting to inhabit the space of the undifferentiated consciousness, trusting that there's not a need for pushing and pulling in here or out there, trusting that non-polarity is more natural, then you will naturally get curious about this, sounds, sensations, the bird, the body, you'll start to really get curious about that. Well, maybe that's not differentiated either. Maybe there is no boundary. But I see a boundary. I see someone here and someone there. Wait a minute, do I actually see that? I don't actually find that in what I'm seeing. And yet it still feels like some kind of duality. Let me look closer at that. What's the nature of the space? Well, I don't see space until I think about space. What's the nature of the sense of something here that's holding itself back from something out there? Well, I don't see that distance. What I feel is a sensation here. Sometimes people say there's a sensation about 2 inches behind my eyes. Often it's really clearly located, or sometimes in the chest or gut. But there'll often be this sense of, oh, there's something here that, because I believe it's in a location pushing everything out or pulling itself back in, I'm extrapolating that, or I'm imposing that onto the visual experience. What if I don't do that? What if there's just a visual experience? What if there's just what you see? Just the scene with no one in it? Nothing in it? No thing in it? No conception laid upon it? No framework intertwined with it? You're all looking at it right now. Every single one in this room sees it. Just see it without being the seer. See it without believing you're seeing something, an object out there. See it without a mechanism or process of seeing. Notice you don't need a mechanism or process for the scene to be the scene. And if it's too tricky with the sight, try it with sound. Why does that sound have to be somewhere? Why does that sound have to be somewhere? Does it have to be somewhere? What happens if it's not somewhere? And I'm not saying that it is nowhere. What if it's not somewhere and it's not nowhere? And yet, it's still there, still something, still an appearance. Now where is it? You can do it with body sensations. Is there a sensation in your chest, gut, neck, head, hands, feet? Where's your attention called in the body? Just notice the sensation, that's it. Innocent, simple sensation. And if your mind's going, I never know what they mean by sensation in the body. Is it energy? Is it inner body, inner energy field of the body, like Eckhart Tolle calls it? Like all that. If that's going on, it's fine. It's analysis. Just let your attention drop back down to the body for a moment. What's felt? Right, where does it go? You feel something in the feet, some fullness, tingling in the belly, wherever. So there it is, right? You're touching that sensation. You're aware of it. There's an awareness of the sensation. There's sensation. That's it. Do you need to be the one aware of that right now? Does the sensation need you to be aware of it? It's kind of funny. If you really get that, it's kind of funny. It's ridiculous. Does the actual experience of sensation need you to experience it? Does it need you to process it? Does it need you to stand back and point at it and go, there's a sensation? Or is it just there? It's just there. One barrier here to this can be that the mind just does not think this is interesting. Why is this guy talking about all these sensations and stuff? I don't care about that. I always feel sensations. I want to have that really cool, wild, universe exploding experience that someone talked about on YouTube. That's what the mind will do. It'll do that. And I'm telling you, you can't have that experience because it's not yours and it's something someone else said, and they don't have the experience anymore. They're just describing something. So forget about it. The money's in that investigation of direct experience in a simple, curious, natural way. And you have 5 senses. And taste is a good one too. You may not taste anything right now, but if you close your eyes, you may notice you can taste something. You can taste the taste of your mouth right now. It might be subtle because your brain sort of filters out anything that's constant. But the moment you put tea on your tongue, oh, by the way, I forgot Violet made a nice beverage for me. Nice hot coffee. But yeah, when you're eating lunch, I'll go to the back 4 tables, 5 tables, whatever we have back there that say silent. Close your eyes. Taste it. Where is the taste? Ask yourself, where is that taste? It's rather enjoyable with food. Smell, same thing. So yeah, 5 senses to work on this with if you want to. And there's another component that comes into all of this that's, I don't know. It's a kind of insight. It's not an insight in the way I usually talk about insight, but it's this insight that says, this whole life is a playground for me. So play the game you want to play. Spend your day feeling, tasting, smelling, and not giving a fuck about what you're supposed to be doing. Just enjoy it. Let me say it this way, because I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying don't go to work and don't take a shower and don't. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you can do all that shit, but you can do it in the way you want to do it, what you really want. And trust me, what you really want, if you're here, and probably what everyone really wants at some level, is to experience reality as it is. That's what you want. And so you have this tremendous gift that we call life. We could call it an incarnation in your body, mind, or something, but you have this tremendous gift of all this entire workshop of sights and smells and sounds and emotional challenges and triggers and movement and stillness and meditation and laughing and moving and peeing and pooping, and like you have access to so much texture, and it's all ripe for exploration. How are we doing time?
Time's up.
Time's up. I finished pretty good on that one. I gotta say, I'm proud of myself. Thank you.